It's all about Pope Joan, who is depicted in the picture of Pope Joan, obviously in yellow because it's all heretical. And this is a wonderful and absolutely genuine medieval woodcut made by Alfred Jarry somewhere in the early 20th century when he was devising the pataphysical calendar, and he announced that the first shitter of the pataphysical era should be the delivery of Saint Jean the Papess, and the second of shitter should be dedicated to the papal mustard maker. So all of this is actually a forgery, and absolutely every step of the way about Pope Joan is about forgeries.
Okay.
So when was Pope Joan on the papal throne? And it turns out that she was on the throne for 2 years, 7 months and 4 days between Leo IV and Benedict III. Now these were popes who were quite obviously depicted in the original photographs on the left and right of the picture, and in between you've got some mad old woman giving birth in the middle of the street. A woman, as history doth tell, in high procession she in labour fell, and was delivered of a bastard son, then Rome some call the whore of Babylon, which was something written about it in 1675 by a lover of truth who just happens to turn out to be one of the bishops in England of the heretical English Church, which we'll not delay ourselves talking about because they're not important. What is important is Leo IV has he has a square halo. That means he was alive when the photograph was taken. Whereas, and he became a saint. It's not only that he was alive, he was at this point a living saint. It's important because his name is Leo IV. Benedict III, who comes after Leo IV, because obviously you can't have a female pope in the middle of two male popes, just can't be done. Benedict IV only ever had a picture made of him in around about 1600. Before that, he had no photograph whatsoever. But what evidence do we actually have that the popes are the popes? Well, traditionally, there are three pieces of evidence offered for the succession of popes. Number one is this piece of evidence, which is the Siena Cathedral nave. They have the busts of the papal succession. So this pope comes before this pope, comes before this pope, comes before this pope, comes before this pope. John VIII was placed between Leo IX and Benedict III until 1600. Pope Clement had a bit of a tizzy and ordered that that should be removed, and it was recycled as the head of Pope Zachary. Pope Deusdedit, which is this pope here, next to the left of the one in the yellow square, serves as an example of how the church does this. If you notice at the top of each of the sculptures, there are little metal things sticking out. And that's because the heads are movable. So, to actually work out if the nave of the Siena Cathedral is at all accurate as a record of the popes, you compare it to the Summus Pontifex, which is a carved list in the Vatican of all of the popes. And what you get in the nave of Siena Cathedral is the same list of popes, but in a different order, because the popes in Siena Cathedral are mobile. This is because they were built to order, and there were some spurs made. The Summus Pontifex only shows the popes of Rome. So popes of Ravenna, popes of Siena, popes of anywhere else were not shown on the Summus Pontifex. And the other thing is, around about 1600, it was re-engraved. So it's inconsistent, but the papacy says this is the absolutely honest to goodness record of which popes were. And what we see here is on this top section, which is to the right of the actual list on the image on the right, is Benedictus III, St. Nicholas I, Hadrianus II, Ioannis VIII, which could be John or it could be Joan, and then Marinus, which could be Martin. And that would suggest that Pope Joan was Pope around about 882. No. So if we look at Saint Deusdedit in 618, he's in this other box, and he comes between Saint Boniface IV and Saint Boniface V. And in actual fact, Saint Deusdedit was also known as Pope Adeodatus. He was made a saint during his lifetime, so he had a square halo around his head in pictures, and he was then inserted in between these two popes, Boniface IV and Boniface V, because it was cheap. You get your gargoyles cheap from your masons. They produce them in bulk. When you're training your apprentices, you say, "Here, Nick, knock off a couple of gargoyles, make them look like popes." And
possibly the same person. Brilliant.
St. Boniface IV and St. Boniface V, although they've got two different statues, two different busts, could actually be the same person, because one is a saint and one isn't a saint. And all they've done is, the Pope, St. Deusdedit, actually means gift of God, and was possibly posthumously inserted into the list in Siena, because Rome said, that's what we're going to do. You know, we've beatified a Pope, change your nave. And so the nave was changed to accommodate St. Deusdedit. So there's no actual reason to believe that Pope Joan would be portrayed in the Siena nave. So we're going to need different evidence. And the other evidence is the famous chair, the sedia gestitoria, which is a birthing chair, or the sedia stercoria, the shitting chair. This chair is made out of, it's allegedly porphyry, but it looks red. It's built to a design which was popular in late antiquity, and it looks like a chair with a hole in it. And the reason for the chair to have a hole in it was to check if the Pope was the Pope. According to the church, this chair was actually used between the dates 1099 with Pope Paschal up to 1513 with Pope Leo the 10th. So if we look at 1099, it's Bishop Urbanus II, and if we look at the other end, it's Julius II in 1513. Urbanus is very obviously a different name from Paschal. Julius is also a very different name to Leo. So the Summus Pontifex itself is not actually that reliable a list of popes. So the ritual that follows on from the church is the result of a rumor. Everyone who talks about it as a rumor. But the persistence of the ritual is also a rumor, in the sense that the rumor about this ritual has far outlived when the church admits there was a ritual, which is between 1099 and 1513. Not all of the rumors actually originate within the church. So it's the story of the ritual is admitted to have happened between Pope Paschal and Pope Leo, which is Bishop Urbanus II and Julius II, and a number of people who produced non-papal chronicles prior to the Reformation, which is important, also refer to the ritual. And what the ritual is we can see it over on the right hand here, with Pope perfectly happily sitting on a seat. And during the installation of the Pope, the most junior cleric present palpates the candidate's papal genitalia through the gap in the chair and declares that testiculos habet et bene pedentes. He has testicles and they dangle well. And the convocation of the clerics responds, habe ovo noster papa. Our father is virile. This is obviously a test of his masculinity, except there are a number of alternative explanations. The papal seat is actually a commode. The installation of the Pope could go on for days, and the Pope was expected to sit there, and the junior cleric was given the job of being the papal gong farmer. Here's a bucket full of papal poop, have a way with it, and that would be their job. The papal seat is a commode. Pope is human, must defecate, and the sedes decoria is a means to check that the Pope is in fact a human being, because they defecate, rather than a demon, because apparently demons do not defecate inside a church.
Well, of course.
So, if you have a demon, and your demon has...
Hang on a minute. I've never defecated inside a church.
No, David. No.
I'm getting worried now.
That's right. Yep.
If you have a demon, and your demon has diarrhea, take them inside a church, they will be cured. Another thing, another possibility is that the junior cleric was in fact a dwarf. Dwarves had remarkable medical powers. Dwarves could cure people, diagnose illnesses, all sorts of medical things. There's no real reason for dwarves having such magical powers, but the Pope did have a dwarf. And it's known that Pope Paschal II had a dwarf. So the explanation of the chair is the dwarf is just doing a papal health check. They don't want the Pope just keeling over 5 minutes after they're elected. So they do a health check. And what better way to do it than on a birthing chair? Palpating the testicles was a ruse. What they wanted was a piece of actually high status, high value furniture to be openly available within the papal palaces, so as papal mistresses could have access to a birthing chair without any suspicion. The evidence for it being a birthing chair is actually quite good. It has a similar design to birthing chairs used in late antiquity. Birthing chairs at the time were very fashionable. There is evidence, like receipts, that kind of thing, that the chair replaced an earlier chair. And the ceremonial exchange recorded for popes also records that the popes used the chair at other times. It doesn't say what the other times were, but it says at other times. Birthing chairs were recorded right across the Holy Roman Empire. And the provenance of the particular chair from Pope Leo X was that it was on the list of property owned by the Medici, and less clearly from before the Medici. So, the birthing chair is probably not great evidence at all. But there is a third piece of evidence that's been traditionally offered, and that piece of evidence is there are papal processions from the Basilica of St. John's in the Lateran to the Basilica of St. Mary Major. The quickest way is past this doorway here. This doorway here is on the is actually a little shrine now, and it's on the corner of Via del Cercetti, number 27. And nobody's quite sure who owns it, but it is maintained. And the papal procession never comes down here. It's the quickest way between the two places, but they never use it. And the rumor is that this is a shrine to Pope Joan. The claim is that Maria's smiles would cheer these places if those who pass by the way say hi or mother to her, is that this is where the Pope Joan gave birth to a child. So they set up a monument, and it is tended by nuns. And I know that it's tended by nuns because just up the road is a nunnery, and they happen to sort of put flowers in and that sort of thing. And at the back here is a very badly maintained painting, which is alleged to be a painting of a woman. So Martin Luther claims to have seen this actual stone, because it is built on a stone and carved into a stone. In Rome, in a public square, there is a stone monument to commemorate the Pope, who is really a woman and gave birth to a child on this very spot. I've seen the stone myself, and I find it astonishing that the Pope's permitted to exist. Now, this is Saint Martin Luther. At this point, Martin Luther is going to be kicked off to heaven. He's got a square halo on his head and everything. He's going to, for the full round halo, he's going to be kicked into heaven. He's going to be an important saint. Instead, he gets summoned to the Diet of Worms. In January 1521, Pope says, "Come to the Diet of Worms." Emperor Charles V declares him to be an outlaw and a heretic, so he can't accept or he can't obtain protection from anyone, and he's actually at risk of being burnt at the stake. And Pope Leo excommunicated him. It was for a lot of other things, but one of the things that he was actually accused of saying was that there was a female pope. And that was one of the things that the Holy Roman Emperor and the Assembly of the Holy Roman Emperor insisted that he recant. It's not really that important unless it is something that the church at that time was very sensitive about. So, one of the things is the church is very upset about people portraying the iconography the way they don't like it to be portrayed. So when the Virgin spanking the Christ child before three witnesses, Andre Breton, Paul Eluard, and the painter in 1928 by Max Ernst, when that was exhibited, there was talk of excommunicating this Max Ernst chap and things like that. But he was outside of the Catholic Christian tradition, and so there was nothing they could realistically do. So what's the point of all the traditional narratives about Joan? The three narratives that are put up and easily knocked down are ones that the church acknowledges, and it simplifies the narrative into three claims. That there's a difficulty in understanding early records. You'll get it wrong, and we can just say what we want. Then there's a motive to undermine the Holy See itself, to say that, well, the Pope is a bad person, that kind of thing. And there's a motive in wanting to start your own church. So because it addresses all three of these, it avoids people actually asking other questions, such as the oral tradition that there's a female pope, the relationship of the religious and the laity, the discussion of art and patronage, and the role of women in the church. The role of women in the church is possibly one of the more important things, particularly since, at the time, women could be bishops. So, what other evidence exists? And what you find is there's some very nice and very expensive sculptures, like the papal statue in St. Paul's Cathedral. And you're not going to knock that down because that was expensive to build. So it used to be at eye level, and it was just mounted higher up the wall. And that was that. Then there's the Pope Joan card from the tarot, which I'll say a bit more about in a little moment. And Giotto, when asked to do a picture of Joan of Arc, did one of Pope Joan because it's a pope, because it has the crucifix and the crozier in the right hand, and the crown on the head, and the scriptures in the left hand, and the foot on the scriptures of the church. That makes it a pope, except it's a girl, so it can't be a pope. There's a lot of things of, well, yes, we've seen all of the evidence that you've shown us, but it can't be because it's a girl. Baldacchini di San Pietro, the altar of, in the back over St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, shows a series of sculptures which seem to show a head emerging from a woman's body. And this is an allegory of the labours of the Mother Church. It's not a reference to the female Pope. It can't be, because that would imply that the Pope was a woman, and the Pope can't be a woman, but the Church can be a woman. Therefore, the Church gives birth to the Pope, which the Pope initially refused to pay for because the bottom of the coat of arms was a vulva. And if you look at it in a certain order, it appears to be a face emerging from women's genitals. Taken with the previous images, the sculpture narrates the Pope in childbirth, which, if the oral tradition has any relevance, is that the Pope was in the Barberini family. The person who became Pope was a Barberini, which is not actually that difficult to believe. The well-connected Mariosa of Tusculum, her wife was Sergius II, who was Pope. She was mother of John the 11th. She was grandmother of Benedict VIII, 7th, and John the 12th. She married into Charlemagne's family. She was from the electors of the House of Tusculum. And her family actually continues right down to the present and is the prince assistant to the papal throne. So she would be the ancestral mother of the youngest cleric, the royal testicle checker. She was from the electors of the House of Tusculum. The electors in medieval Europe elected the Holy Roman Emperor. So they were basically the nobility across Europe would get together, and like the electoral college in America for the president, they would say, yeah, he's our lad, we'll have him as Pope. We'll have him as Emperor. And so the Emperor always had to keep in well with the Pope. And the whole point of him called the Holy Roman Emperor was that it was basically a seal of approval, Pope-approved Emperor. There was an equally well-connected sister, Manfreda, who was an umiliata, a humility woman. She is the origin of the Popess on the tarot. She first identified on the Sforza Visconti tarot, which is one of the earliest tarots, and she was actually elected Pope by the Guglielmite heretics, because they claimed she was the incarnation of the incarnation of the Holy Ghost. She was heralding an order of female popes, and that we'd all be led towards paradise by female popes. And then she had the bad managed to actually die in 1281. The Inquisition got wind of Sister Manfreda because she was part of some of the very well-connected families, the Sforzas, who argued a lot with the Borgias, the Sforzas who argued a lot with the Medici. These were all families who were popes at one time or another. She argued with them and fell foul of the Inquisition, who decided to burn her at the stake in 1300, around about 20 years after she died. So, she was declared a heretic, and all of the people who'd listened to her understood her and believed in her, and more importantly, elected her pope. They were also declared heretics. This was actually a very important change, a very important shift in political power within the church, because it was at the tail end of the election of the Pope by the people. Up to this point, the Pope had been elected by the people of Rome. So we're shifting from the papacy being something elected by popular vote or a riotous mob to being elected by cardinals who were all male. So it was very much a shift in power from a quite diverse source of power to a very male source of power. So we then move on to the idea that if the Pope was female, or if the Pope was of any sex whatsoever, they have a relationship to the Emperor, and that relationship is shown through coins. So on the left side, we have the Pope side of the coin, which has the monogram of the Pope, and on the right side, we have the imperial side of the coin, which has the Emperor's monogram, and you can trace the change in who was on the Holy Seat in Rome and who was on the imperial seat in Frankfurt or wherever, by whose monogram is on the coins. And what we actually find is that in 856 to 858, there is a coin which says SO. And then from 875 onwards, it says OS. Now, you can say, well, you can just twist that around. But if you twist it around, you then turn this monogram upside down. So there is a specific way that you read the monogram, and it is from top to bottom, and it is on both of these coins, the arrow shows which way is the top. So that is a different monogram to that, even though they look very similar. They're found in low denominations across Europe, and there's such a low denomination that they're not actually worth forging for art historical reasons. You're not going to make a fortune out of forging these. The metal, most importantly, dates to the period and comes from Europe rather than the Middle East. So they're found in places which are called convincing contexts. They're found in use, in people's stash of money, and they've got these variant initials, SO and OS. The one on the left-hand side is incised, the one on the right is flat, and they've both got the same imperial side. So there is something different about the Pope in 856 to 858 and 875 onwards. So that then leaves you with the literature of Pope Joan, which basically most recently is Donna Woolfolk Cross wrote a novel. Carol Churchill had Pope Joan appear in a play. Kingsley Porter, another play. Alfred Jarry wrote an opera. Emmanuel Roydus is the most important insofar as the translation of Emmanuel Roydus, who is Greek, by Lawrence Durrell, is probably the best historical narrative of who Pope Joan actually was. And before that, you find Elkanah Settle, Martinus Polanus, and Jean de Mailly. Now, if you actually read from the bottom of the screen up, everybody, each step up, adds a little bit more to the story of Pope Joan. So all of them include the story written by Jean de Mailly. All of it, Martinus Polanus. Hello?
Hello?
Oh, Martinus
Yeah, we can
Polanus.
still hear you.
Sorry, I just wandered off. Martinus Polanus increased the story, and then Elkanah Settle is one of the first Protestants to start using the story to attack the papacy. Before Elkanah Settle, all of the stories about Martinus Polanus, all of the stories about Pope Joan were written by either Jesuits or Dominicans. And it turns out that there was a big power struggle within the church at the time between Dominicans and Jesuits. And so all of that falls out into Elkanah Settle's lap, who then uses it to say that the Pope's a monster. Then we sort of skip up to the 19th century, and people like Alfred Jarry and Manuel Royadus, they take the basic myth of Pope Joan and dress it up into much longer stories. Along the way, Royadus who is a part of the Greek Orthodox Church, gets excommunicated by the Greek Orthodox Church and the Roman Church. So it's still a sore point that there might have been a female pope. So the basic literature it's literally this story. There is no other historical kernel to the story other than this. After Leo, John Anglicus, born in Mainz, was pope for 2 years, 7 months and 4 days, and died in Rome, after which there was a vacancy in the papacy of 1 month. It's claimed that this John was a woman, who as a girl had been led to Athens, dressed in the clothes of a man by a certain lover of hers. There she became proficient in a diversity of branches of knowledge until she had no equal, and afterwards, in Rome, she taught the liberal arts and had great masters amongst her students and audience. A high opinion of her life and learning arose in the city and was the choice of all for Pope. While Pope, however, she became pregnant by her companion. Through ignorance of the exact time when the birth was expected, she was delivered of a child while in procession from St. Peter's to the Lateran in a narrow lane between the Colosseum and St. Clement's Church. After her death, it's said she was buried in the same place. The Lord Pope always turns aside from this street, and it's believed by many that it is done because of the abhorrence of the event. Nor is she placed on the list of the Holy Pontiffs, both because of her female sex and on account of the foulness of the matter. And so by the time of Elkanah Settle, we have absolutely fabulous pictures which are taken of the Pope playing cards for whatever reason. And there are sort of operas and plays and broadsides published about the Pope being a woman. Then, in the 20th century, people actually start saying, well, that there was a Pope, and sculptures of female popes start appearing for no really explicable reason outside of the control of the church in various places, like this one in Spitalfield Lane in Sussex, which was put there in 1999, and successively over the 20th century, various portraits and sculptures of Pope Joan have appeared in different places. So all fairly consistent in that They portray her as being a pope rather than a nun dressed up as a pope. And importantly, they all tend to show her with bare hands. So she's not got a ring saying that she's a nun married to Christ or anything like that. So back to the Protestants and the Reformation, a game appears called Pope Joan, which appears as Pope Julius in 1792, which, if you actually can remember back to the very early part, was one of the popes on the Summus Pontifex between the beginning and the end of the use of the chair. And in Hoyle's games in 1812, it's called Pope Joan. It might derive from an earlier tarot game, in which it was called Nain Jean, the Yellow Dwarf. Yellow is for heresy, and the Nine of Diamonds is the Pope, and therefore the Curse of Scotland. Dwarf was because the Pope had one, and the Pope was one, because the Pope was the greatest man amongst men, but not actually greater than any other man. The game flourished with stories. So it's a way of people getting together and talking about various things. And it's basically a card chasing game where you're trying to find the Pope. So when it comes to actually, why wouldn't you just admit that there's been a female Pope? It comes down to the politics of the very early church. So there's been a persistent tradition of the female religious, which is women in charge of the religious life of the early Christians. In the Catacombs of Priscilla, there are frescoes, which you see on the left here, and in the Hagia Sophia, there are frescoes, which you see on the right. The iconography consists of them being bishops. They've got things above their heads, so here, they've got things above their heads, and they've got this gesture of their arms is called the orant gesture. Only priests and popes and bishops were allowed to do that. So this woman she's leading first. She is, in fact, the religious person in charge of this congregation of people. And over on the left-hand side, you see much, much smaller, because we can get a bigger picture, a woman being given holy orders. At the time, there were no nuns. The only holy orders were, you're an ordinary pleb, you're a bishop, you're an important bishop. And that was kind of the hierarchy of the church. It was only with the rise of the medieval imperial order of the Holy Roman Empire that you actually got the idea that there was a single pope. Every single one of these bishops was equally called a pope. This gets dismissed as folk art because, well, you know, the Christians were oppressed. The logic is the Christians were oppressed at the time, and so they graffitied the walls in catacombs. Not sure how that actually works, but that was the logic of it. Then we find, it was also at the time of iconoclasm, which was the smashing of the icons. So a huge number of these icons, these pictures, were physically destroyed by the early church. And it's now believed that an awful lot of them had pictures of women. Pictures of black people, pictures of all of the people that sort of get marginalized anyway. And one of them is, again, she's got a square halo here, so she's alive. This is a mosaic of Bishop Theodora in a side chapel in St. Praxedis Church in Rome. So she was alive when this fresco was made, and she was a saint. It's known that she baptized pagans from her home, and she would have been a contemporary of any historical Pope Joan because she lived for ages. And the text of the mosaic translates in two ways. I'm not reading the Latin bit because it's Latin. And on the entrance at the entrance of the basilica, on the right-hand side, where the body of His Most Kind Mother, Lady Bishop Theodora, rests, the aforementioned Bishop, Pope Paschal I, interred the bodies of the Venerable Zeno and others. The other translation is, and at this very entrance of the basilica on the right side were the Virgin Mary, for whom we should be thankful, is where the body of Lady Theodora Bishop rests. This venerable bishop, Pope Paschal, interred the bodies of Venerable Zeno and others. It's believed that there's two different translations, one of which says she was the mother of the bishop, sorry, the mother of the Pope Paschal. The other was that she actually was Pope Paschal. And at the time, this was one of the icons which escaped the iconoclasts. And it just turned out to be one of the ones which said women were doing Pope things. Pope Andre Breton. Obviously, at the time the photograph was taken, he had a square halo. So he was a living saint, and therefore he could be a pope. And to the right, we have the bearer of this card is a genuine and authorized pope. So please treat them right good forever. Genuine and authorized by the House of Apostles of Eris. The Discordian religion allows anybody whatsoever to be a pope. And that includes Andre Breton, even if he's being horrible to people. And it includes Pope Joan. The end. Apparently she gave birth in the street, and that's the only thing that makes her a bad pope.